Russia didn't announce a new offensive, and it didn't need to. What shifted in Transnistria wasn't a battlefield condition, but a strategic one. One of Moscow's most reliable pressure tools stopped producing the effect it was designed for. And when pressure no longer triggers predictable reactions, control over escalation begins to slip. That loss of predictability is now visible in Transnistria. For decades, this narrow strip of land inside Moldova served a specific purpose for Moscow. It existed as a constant variable in the background, useful not because it moved, but because it didn't. Its presence shaped decisions long before any action was required. Moldova adjusted its behavior around that reality. Western involvement slowed around it. Russian leverage expanded without Russia having to absorb the costs of direct control. That balance held because it rested on a single assumption that Moldova would remain isolated long enough for pressure to force outcomes. That assumption is no longer reliable. The change didn't come from escalation. It came from geography. Romania's involvement didn't introduce a new threat to Russia. It removed the delay that Russia's pressure model depends on to work. Once that delay disappeared, pressure stopped accelerating toward crisis. Instead, it began losing momentum. That shift is what makes Transnistria dangerous for Moscow now. Transnistria was never intended to be a launch point for war. It was built to influence decisions without forcing confrontation. A limited Russian military presence kept escalation credible without making it inevitable. Energy dependence created leverage without requiring constant intervention. Political ambiguity slowed outside responses before they could solidify. When pressure arrived, Moldova felt it immediately. Energy instability narrowed decision timelines. Political stress increased while support mechanisms lagged behind events. That timing advantage mattered more than force. Moscow never needed Moldova to fail permanently. Short-term instability was enough to extract compliance. As long as Moldova remained structurally fragile, Transnistria amplified pressure instead of consuming resources. Energy tied the system together. For years, Moldova relied heavily on Russian gas. Transnistria relied on it almost entirely. Industrial output, electricity generation, and winter heating all depended on a supply chain Moscow could influence at will. That dependence made pressure efficient. Disruptions didn't need to be dramatic. They only needed to arrive before alternatives could activate. For a long time, that model worked. Then the timeline broke. The disruption itself was familiar. Energy flows tightened, prices increased. Transnistria absorbed the impact immediately. What changed was the response on the Moldovan side. The system didn't collapse. Emergency energy sources came online faster than Russia's strategy anticipated. Alternative supply routes carried the load before panic could spread. This wasn't a sudden surge in Moldovan strength. It was the result of Moldova no longer facing pressure alone. Romania didn't replace Russia as a dominant actor. It intercepted the shock before it could cascade. Once that happened, Moscow's leverage stopped compounding. Romania's influence here isn't rooted in confrontation. It's rooted in proximity and integration. Energy assistance no longer required extended coordination cycles. Diplomatic alignment didn't lag behind events. Institutional support arrived while pressure was still building, not after damage had already been done. That distinction matters. Russia's pressure model depends on urgency forming faster than stability. When urgency fails to materialize, leverage degrades. Romania removed the isolation that pressure relies on, not through signaling, not through escalation, through reliability, and reliability is corrosive to coercion. This is where the strategic logic reverses. Transnistria only functions as leverage when the surrounding state remains weak. Once Moldova stopped reacting predictably under pressure, the enclave's role changed. Instead of amplifying influence, it began exposing cost. The region lacks economic self-sufficiency. Energy supply, trade access, and financial stability all depend on external systems that now face constraints. As subsidies stretch and logistics tighten, maintaining the enclave becomes more expensive. Russian forces stationed there face increasing isolation. Supply routes narrow. Reinforcement options draw scrutiny the moment they move. What was once a low-maintenance pressure asset begins demanding attention without guaranteeing results. Moscow recognizes this shift. That recognition explains why its posture around Moldova has grown more cautious rather than more aggressive. Escalation no longer promises reliable payoff. This is not about Moldova preparing a military solution. It isn't about Romania seeking confrontation. It's about systems absorbing pressure instead of fracturing under it. Once Moldova operates within a wider European framework, pressure stops collapsing institutions. It becomes manageable. Systems designed to manage stress do not fail on schedule. They adapt. They remove vulnerabilities over time. For Moscow, that creates an uncomfortable reality. Pressure without momentum drains resources. Escalation without urgency introduces risk. Influence without leverage becomes expensive. All three dynamics are now converging around Transnistria. This is how Transnistria stops functioning as leverage and begins functioning as a strategic burden, with Russia's options narrowing faster than geography alone would suggest. Transnistria didn't suddenly become a liability for Russia. The shift began when pressure stopped triggering predictable reactions in Moldova. For years, the enclave's usefulness came from how little it needed to do. Its presence alone shaped expectations, slowed responses, and reminded decision-makers that escalation remained an option, even when it never materialized. As long as Moldova reacted to stress within a narrow window, that arrangement remained efficient. Once that window stopped closing on schedule, the logic began to fracture. The first visible strain appeared in the economic layer. Transnistria does not operate as a self-contained system. Industrial activity there depends on energy inputs that arrive from outside the region, while trade routes and financial arrangements pass through environments Moscow does not fully control. When energy disruptions occurred, those dependencies surfaced immediately. Production slowed in ways local authorities could not easily correct. Electricity constraints began affecting daily operations rather than isolated sectors. What emerged was not collapse, but accumulation. Accumulation is costly. For Moscow, this creates a dilemma that did not exist before. Pressure applied to Moldova now feeds back into Transnistria itself, turning what was once a force multiplier into a sink for resources and attention. Instead of amplifying leverage, the enclave begins absorbing strain. That reversal matters because Transnistria was never designed to function under sustained stress. Its role depended on remaining insulated from the consequences of pressure applied elsewhere. The military dimension tightens that constraint further. Russian forces in Transnistria were positioned to influence outcomes without drawing focus. Their utility came from presence, not maneuver, and from implication rather than activity. As long as escalation worked quickly, that posture remained stable. Stabilization in Moldova changes the calculation. Transnistria's geography offers little margin for adjustment. The region lacks strategic depth, relies on narrow access routes, and exposes any movement to immediate observation. Those limitations were tolerable when escalation benefited Moscow. Once escalation lost its payoff, the same limitations began generating risk. Reinforcement now attracts scrutiny rather than deterring it. Logistical movement raises questions that did not previously need answers. Visibility introduces political consequences before tactical benefits can materialize. Russia does not fear Moldovan military action. What it avoids is entanglement that widens attention beyond the immediate theater. The enclave's proximity to NATO-aligned borders amplifies that concern, not through automatic escalation, but through the strategic attention any misstep would generate. That risk profile only emerges when pressure fails to resolve quickly. Now it does. Isolation once insulated Transnistria from responsibility. Limited oversight reduced costs, while ambiguity allowed Moscow to manage influence without committing to outcomes. That insulation is eroding. As surrounding systems stabilize without Russian participation, supply routes narrow and political cover thins. The longer the situation persists without resolution, the more the enclave demands maintenance without producing leverage. Transnistria begins to behave less like a pressure point and more like an obligation. Each unresolved month increases resource requirements while reducing strategic flexibility. Each crisis absorbed by the enclave adds friction without delivering influence. Attempts to activate it draw attention Moscow would prefer to avoid. This process is not sudden, it is cumulative, and cumulative shifts are difficult to reverse once they settle into the system. The most consequential change is political rather than military. Moldova no longer needs to respond rapidly to avoid escalation. It can allow negotiations to stretch without immediate penalty. It can decline externally imposed timelines without triggering crisis. Time once favored Moscow because pressure produced urgency. That relationship has inverted. Romania's involvement accelerates this inversion without forcing confrontation. Support reaches Moldova before stress peaks. Coordination precedes instability, and institutional backing interrupts escalation before it becomes decisive. As a result, Transnistria loses its ability to shape outcomes indirectly. The enclave remains unresolved, but it no longer dictates behavior. Its presence still exists, yet its influence over decision-making fades. That shift alters the entire balance. Russia retains options on paper, but each path now carries costs that were previously avoidable. Escalation risks drawing wider attention without guaranteeing results. Restraint allows structural erosion to continue unchecked. Withdrawal would signal loss of influence. Sustained maintenance drains resources while delivering diminishing returns. None of these outcomes offer a clean resolution. That is what makes the situation unstable, not because Transnistria is about to ignite, but because it no longer performs the function it was built to serve. The enclave no longer accelerates pressure or forces decisions. Instead, it binds Moscow to a position that grows more restrictive over time. That restriction compounds quietly. Transnistria has not disappeared from the map. Its role has changed. Frozen conflicts remain useful only while surrounding environments stay fragile. Once stability takes hold, the freeze begins working against the actor maintaining it. Russia is now operating inside that phase. The enclave absorbs pressure rather than projecting it. The shift does not produce a dramatic inflection point, but it steadily narrows the range of viable choices. And that narrowing matters because Romania is not acting in isolation. It operates as part of a broader system. Once Moldova becomes embedded within that system, Transnistria ceases to be a regional lever and becomes a strategic burden with no clean exit. Russia has always been effective at exploiting weak front lines. It has been far less effective at influencing systems once they harden. That distinction explains why Moldova now poses a different kind of problem for Moscow. For most of its post-Soviet history, Moldova existed in a gray zone that favored pressure. Institutions were fragile, infrastructure was exposed, and political alignment remained uncertain. In that environment, leverage didn't need to be precise. It only needed to arrive faster than stability. Romania's role is to remove that gray zone without turning Moldova into a battlefield. The approach is subtle, but its effects compound. Front lines respond to force. Systems respond to resilience. Romania's strategy does not revolve around confrontation or guarantees. It focuses on embedding Moldova into structures that already function under stress. Energy flows now route through diversified networks rather than singular choke points. Institutional coordination links Moldovan responses to European timelines instead of isolated reaction cycles. Economic exposure distributes risk rather than concentrating it. Each of these shifts reduces the impact of pressure without provoking escalation. The result is not immunity, it is manageability, and pressure that can be managed loses its ability to coerce. Energy was Russia's most reliable lever because it produced urgency. Romania's involvement disrupts that effect by altering response speed. When disruption occurs, alternatives activate earlier. Support arrives before panic can reshape political outcomes. Decision makers gain time instead of losing it. Time is the critical variable here. Once Moldova can absorb short-term shocks without institutional collapse, energy pressure stops functioning as a decisive tool. It becomes one factor among many rather than a trigger for crisis. That change forces Moscow to expend effort without guaranteeing results. Beyond energy, institutional integration reshapes the terrain further. Legal alignment, administrative reform, and regulatory coordination reduce the space where informal leverage traditionally operates. Opaque systems that once allowed external influence become more rule-bound. Personal pressure loses effectiveness when processes replace discretion. These changes rarely generate headlines. They are slow, technical, and difficult to reverse. For Moscow, that presents a challenge with no obvious counter. Influence that relies on ambiguity struggles once ambiguity disappears. Romania's position inside NATO adds a further layer without altering Moldova's formal neutrality. Cooperation does not require membership. Training, intelligence sharing, and crisis coordination raise the cost of interference without crossing red lines. This does not create automatic escalation, it creates hesitation. Pressure strategies depend on ambiguity about response. Romania shortens response chains and clarifies consequences earlier in the cycle. Visibility replaces uncertainty, and visibility undermines leverage. Moldova is no longer treated as a prize to be seized. It is treated as infrastructure to be stabilized. That framing removes decisive moments Moscow once relied on. There is no single election to hijack, no singular dependency to exploit, no narrow window where panic guarantees concessions. Pressure now tests the system instead of collapsing it. Each failed attempt strengthens adaptation rather than producing compliance. For Russia, this creates a structural problem. Escalation becomes riskier. Restraint becomes less effective. Influence requires sustained investment without assurance of return. That is not a favorable trade. Transnistria cannot counter this shift. It depends on the very fragility that Moldova is shedding. As Moldova stabilizes inside a wider framework, the enclave becomes increasingly disconnected from outcomes. Its presence no longer shapes behavior. Its activation no longer guarantees leverage. Instead, it ties Russia to a position that grows more isolated as the surrounding system strengthens. This is not defeat in a conventional sense. It is strategic exhaustion. What's happening around Transnistria is not unique. It reflects a larger pattern emerging across Europe's eastern edge. Pressure works best against isolation. It struggles against integration. Romania's role accelerates that transition without forcing confrontation, which is precisely why it is difficult to counter. Russia is not losing Moldova because it was pushed out. It is losing leverage because the environment no longer responds the way it used to. And, in Transnistria, that change leaves Moscow anchored to a position that no longer serves its original purpose. The map hasn't changed, the system has, and systems are far harder to coerce than front lines.